So Mohan, I'm going to ask some difficult questions. My question is, are some people just lucky? Because others don't have that environment. Others work in environments where there isn't that support, from a senior level, for people to have the latitude to learn and to develop.
Basically how people do in many parts of life, not just working life, it could be in voluntary life, it could be in charities, it could be in people's faith groups or whatever, is there are three things, right? One is technical competence. Are you good at the thing you are, whether you're an engineer or an accountant or a salesperson, are you good at doing that thing, right? That's, I reckon that's a third of what will determine your success. Right?
Okay.
The next third is visible. Have you made yourself visible to the people around you? Because if you're not, and the third thing is profile. So when you make yourself visible, do you make an impression? Do you find something which distinguishes you? Not entirely, but enough, right? So, and I think it's the three things, and I actually think it's probably a third.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Against All Odds podcast. My name is Daniel Coker, your regular host. And this week, we are privileged to have as a guest on our show, Mr. Mohan Yogendran. Did I get the pronunciation right?
Brilliant.
Mohan is originally from Sri Lanka. And grew up in, is it Bristol?
No, London.
In London, actually? Okay. And Mohan is an experienced global executive recruiter or headhunter. And he's had a very varied career, spanned many years. He's had his first degree in Cambridge, Jesus College in Cambridge, and then did his master's in Bristol University, and worked in a number of professional organizations, and now he's moving into a new venture, which we're going to find out hopefully in this conversation. And he's someone who has a wealth of experience, and I'm going to be asking him many questions that people have put to us about what we need to do, to find the jobs that we want, and how we need to comport ourselves or carry ourselves to make the most of the opportunities that come to us when we get jobs and all that. So, Mohan, you're welcome to the AAO podcast.
Thank you so much.
Before this episode starts, I'd like to ask a big favor. Your subscription means a lot to us, because the bigger this platform gets, the bigger the guests get. So do me a favor, please click on the subscribe button and the bell notification, so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. Now let's get back to this episode. Fantastic. So tell us a bit about your journey. When you came to the United Kingdom and a bit of a family background.
Yeah, so as you said, I'm Sri Lanka. Those of us, people might know that Sri Lanka's had, like many countries, a troubled past. With a minority, I'm from the minority community, Tamils. Okay. And the war that has raged for many years, brewed way back, without getting too political. It's one of the things that the British left as a legacy when they left. They didn't really sort out. They divided and ruled and left. We can talk about that if you want, but that's a whole different conversation. And so my dad came here, stayed, studied a bit, worked a bit, went back, got married, had me, came back. So I was 3. My younger brother was born here. He's one of the things he used to always say was, made in England, made in Sri Lanka. So I was imported at the age of 3. So, and we grew up in Notting Hill when it wasn't trendy. It was the time, for those people who watch this who have longer memories or know London, it was a time with scurrilous landlords, heavy overcrowding, particularly of migrant communities, Caribbean, different parts of Asia. I can't remember all of that, obviously, but it's come back to me because I've been on the board of a housing association that has a link there, which we can talk about if you want. And then my dad was what I would call a gentle rebel. And while communities then move and help each other as they move on, right? A lot of our community, who were which are small compared to many other Asian or black communities, were moving along the Met Line, right, towards, if those who know London, towards Harrow, Wembley, Harrow. My dad said there's a place called Croydon. There's no tube, but there's trains, and I can get into London for work.
Yeah.
So we moved down there. So we raised down there. In fact, now it's a very diverse community down in Croydon. But I'm not sure my dad was responsible for that, but nevertheless, we lived down there. I was there, and then did all my schooling there. I did an economics degree at Cambridge University, and then did a master's in race relations at Bristol. If I'm being a bit too reflective on it, it's probably my own journey of working out my identity that helped me go through some of those steps. Because even when I did economics, I loved the stuff that wasn't maths, econometrics. I loved the stuff which was all around how does society organise itself? How come some groups of people seem to do these jobs and other groups do these other jobs? And how come in other places a bit different like that? And why is that? Because surely the talent is spread equally everywhere. So why is this? It intrigued me. So that's why I went down that, and then I started working.
So tell us a bit about your how you got into Cambridge and stuff like that. I mean, did you go to state school?
No, I went to independent school.
Okay. In Croydon.
In Dulwich, actually.
In Dulwich
College.
Okay.
People know that school. I had a great time. Okay. I'm not the strongest advocate for independent education, but it is what it is. And the college I went for made an offer to me based on my results. So I went on and did the exams you have to do to get there. I'm not sure on the basis of the exams I would have got in. So just as well they made me an offer. Yeah. And I actually found it really humbling. I mean, one of the things that will stay with me at the end of my days, I had fantastic friends, like many people do at university, a few of whom you stick with for the rest of your days. This is also part of discovering my identity. I found I had loads more in common from the students in Cambridge who came from minority backgrounds, and most of them much more modest backgrounds than me. And they were really clever. I mean, if any of them watch this, they can smile from where they're sitting, because I hope they know that I know that, and I think that. And I learned from them. I learned from them how to learn. Because I think what the independent education did, it didn't teach me to learn, it taught me to jump hurdles. Right.
Okay.
Metaphorical hurdles.
Okay.
Not real ones. And I just learnt from my other friends who had come up much more the tough way than I did, how to learn, and that stays with me. So, So 3 years there, and I had a passion for this issue around how does society organise itself, particularly around work. And there's this master's in race relations at Bristol University, and I got in to do that, and I got a grant as well. Actually, I can't believe it. And it was a great year. It was an indulgent year. It wasn't just about the UK. It was fascinating at the time. This dates me. South Africa had apartheid, so we studied South Africa. We studied Brazil, which claims to be racially equal, but isn't. Has amazing range of words to describe between white and black. And you only have that if you want to differentiate that much amongst people. And we studied to Hawaii, which is amazing because it was portrayed as one of the most racially equal societies on earth, and there's a historical reason for that. And many years later, we went on a family trip there, and I went to test it out. And, but I was in leisure. I was in leisure mode too in Hawaii, but. And obviously we studied Britain, and that was the time there'd been race riots in different cities. It was a very interesting time. Actually in Bristol, as well as some of the parts of Liverpool and Birmingham and London. So it was fascinating. And then I wanted to work in that field. I'd got in to the fast stream of the civil service, which you're supposed to take if you get it.
Okay.
I was doing it as a safety net if I didn't get the work to go into diversity and race. I don't know if people who watch this who come from extended family cultures would get this, but in our culture, when you go to a family event, it could be a celebration do, it could be a wedding or something, because of the respect for elders, often your elders would talk about you as if you're not but you're standing there. So I remember one conversation where somebody was asking my dad, so what is Mohan doing now? I'm like, I'm in a position to answer this. I'm standing here. And he said, oh, he's working in race equality, and they said, but he was doing so well at Cambridge. I'm like, which point do I get a chance to intervene? My dad was brilliant. He said, no, it's his passion. He wants to do it. It says, great, thank you for being my advocate. But you try to intervene, but you let it go. It's the respect for elders. It's how people go. I mean, it's probably changed now in the next with the next generation.
Yeah.
And I got a job in what was called a racial equality council in a part of the country, beautiful part of the country called Gloucestershire.
Okay.
I lived in Cheltenham and I lived in Gloucester. And naivety is a really brilliant thing. I didn't really know much about the world of work except from some summer jobs, working in a couple of shops and working as a hospital porter. And I had a brief to promote race diversity in employment in the Gloucestershire, which had a lot of large companies, a lot of companies in the defence industry, in electronics, and in consumer goods. The big employer in Gloucester was Bird's Eye Walls ice cream.
Okay.
And the black community in Gloucester was nearly all from 2 parishes from Jamaica. And the Asian community was all Gujarati Muslim.
Okay.
And 10 miles down the road in Cheltenham, the Asian community was all Gujarati Hindu. So they were the, and then obviously lots of other different people. But in a county that's steeped in UK history, right? I mean, a disproportionate number of royals lived there, right? So I think it's third to half of the night shift of one of the large companies, the ice cream one, were from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Now, you're not telling me that our communities love to do nights more than everyone else. These were the sorts of challenges, and there was issues around unemployment. But my naivety, I learned to be less naive. I just went for it with these things. I just, when we dealt with it, when we had a complaint about a young guy came to me and said, the job centre they said there was a job in an electronics store. When I got there, they said the job was gone. But I don't think it has. I said, let's do an experiment. He said, can you meet me again tomorrow with a white friend of yours? And we did the experiment. I hid behind a pillar outside the shop, and he went in, tasked with the job, and he said, no, it's not. The other guy went in, and they gave him the application form. So,
really?
So we raised the complaint. Actually, it ended up with the store being closed down. Actually, didn't expect that to happen. So then there were no jobs for anybody in that store. I mean, I'm not sure that was my objective here, but I had a boss that gave me freedom to roam, do all this stuff, meet employers, do all this stuff. The naivety was hilarious. The local commercial radio station was then called Seven Sound. It then merged with something in Bristol, and they had a reggae show on Saturdays, and a local lad did the show. Lovely guy. For some reason, he agreed to read out job opportunities on a Saturday night between 9 and 11. Really? How did he do that? Because I asked him to, and he'd do that. And sometimes he'd have me on the radio to talk about it. I'm thinking, this is leisure time at its peak, right? Why do they want to? But anyway,
talk about it.
But I felt like I was in a cartoon existence, or one, and then I had a great couple of years there, and then the county council. Biggest employer, 16,000 people at the time, was embarking on a journey around equality and diversity. They were new to it, and they wanted to appoint someone to drive some of this stuff, based in HR. And I'd got to know some of the people in the county council. I went through a competitive process, and they offered me the role. And that was my first insight into working inside a large corporate.
So did you have to do like the CIPD and all that, or?
Yeah, well, when I joined the county council, they sponsored me through it. So I did it at a local college there, which was great. And like all these things, you end up learning more really from the people you're doing it with than necessarily the teaching. I mean, the teaching's fine, but what they're doing is acting as chaperoning you to learn from your colleagues, right? Because they provide the real evidence, examples of different styles of managing people, employee relations, workplace cultures, and I had another absolutely great boss. I must have been really difficult for him because I was so much of a terrier. I used to sometimes just knock on his door and go and say, Tony, can I have a word? But then start talking, even if there was someone sitting there, right? And he always gently put his pen down or papers down and gave me counsel and advice. Excellent guy, really good. And I also learnt a lot then from the CEO of the council, who's went on to other great things. Some people in the public sector, many people know him. There's a guy called Michael Bichard, really great guy, who had come from being chief executive of Brent, very different, to come to Gloucestershire. And I really learnt how he adopted a change management approach. His model was to say, let's throw lots of balls in the air because some of them will land. Other people take a different approach. Let's throw a few and make sure they all land. And he was a great advocate on being more reflective of the communities we're serving. That's his big driver. So, and that was my in terms of the things we were doing on employment for the county council. Did all of that stuff. By then I'd met my future wife. Who was a Hackney girl, and was thinking about where we're going to settle down, and we decided we'd hold out to get a job in London. She was already working in London, and I got a job with one of the London boroughs. I was still in the public sector, the London Borough of Hillingdon, the one that covers West London and Heathrow Airport, to do the HR stuff and diversity. And had another great boss, actually, very different style, high energy guy, who I learned a lot from. Some of the technical stuff around employee relations and grievances, disciplinaries and policy writing. And also, by then I'd learnt how to work in a political environment. When I was in Gloucestershire, we worked largely with the Liberal Democrat Council. In Hillingdon, we worked with a Conservative Council, which changed to Labour. So I have my own little set of war stories about each of those experiences. Because obviously when you're working for the council, you're there to be apolitical, right? To do with the wishes of the political leaders. So we did that for a while. Really had a good experience, actually. And I went for a director of HR role in another London borough and didn't get it. But there was a firm that was doing the recruitment exercise for them, and it was a team within PwC. And they gave me some very helpful feedback, and then they said, would you like to join us? So that was not on the radar, to join their headhunting team. They had a team that did headhunting for clients. Their competitors, most of them had something as well at the time, something similar. So I joined them, totally different environment, totally to understand professional services ethic, where you're selling no tangible products whatsoever. You're selling collections of brains, really, and ideas. That's all they've got, right? And it was fascinating. And the work was for clients, but occasionally we did some work for the firm itself. And it was great, really great experience across different sectors. Some private sector, some public sector, local and national government, some charities. A great team, but the writing was on the wall around the big issue back then, and it raises its head every now and then again, is for the big legacy accounting firms. Are there conflicts if they start selling other services to their clients, to their audit clients? And that issue started to grow. It culminated globally in the horror story that was the Enron scandal and the demise of one of the competitors, Anderson. And so we knew that something was going to happen generally about everything that wasn't audit. And our shop was tiny, right, compared to the big consulting arm. But even then, people would say, hold on, you're hiring the finance director of that company, but we audit them. You don't do that. So we got stronger in government work because we were less conflicted, which we didn't mind. Many of us had come from that sector. And then eventually our business got sold to Capita, to a division. But I'd already left by then. I'd got tapped on the shoulder. It's weird when a headhunter gets headhunted because you know the game, right? So, and it was all about joining EY, but to go back into HR. And within a business of EY called, they called it then corporate finance. So it wasn't the audit business. And I thought, this is a bit weird. We'll go through some conversations. I quite liked it. I thought, this is going to be a lot to learn here. And there's lots of stakeholder interviews. I think there's about 5 or 6.
Okay.
After about the second one, my straight-talking wife from Hackney
Mm-hmm.
said to me, and this is the way she shows her support,
Mm-hmm.
hope she won't mind me saying this, she said to me as I was leaving the door to go to the second interview, they must be really desperate if they're talking to you. I'm like, why? What? Well, you don't know anything about corporate finance. You better tell them that. I said, okay. So I went in and said, hello, I don't know anything about corporate finance. I said, no, we're hiring you for your generic skills, your capabilities, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So I joined them, had a great 4 or 5 years there.
Okay.
In organisations change their model around HR. So instead
Okay.
of having lots of HR in different departments, you centralise some of it. You call them centres of excellence and all that stuff. So I increasingly, they asked me to do hiring for the firm.
Okay.
Partners and directors in different divisions. So I did that a lot in corporate finance and a few other areas. And I'm actually happy. I became a director there. I was quite happy there, actually. But my former colleagues I'd worked with who had gone to Capita, some of them felt a bit constrained there, and they got some backing and they set up a business called Rock Pools.
Oh, okay.
And a year into that, some of them are my friends actually. One or two of them approached me and said, "Look, we're independent now. We're not conflicted. We need someone to grow our private sector hiring. Would you be up for that?" And I said, "What? I'm going to leave a global brand and join you lot in a room in Farringdon." I'm like, my heart was with them.
Yeah.
My head had to catch up.
Okay.
My colleagues made it easier because I had nothing to do with this. They won the work to do all the senior hiring for the body that was putting together the infrastructure for the Olympic Games, London Olympic Games. And that was a big gig. And it made me feel comfortable that my head could follow my heart. Right?
Okay.
So I joined it. And I started to grow our private sector work. And we work as I don't know if this is too much detail for people, but we work as a retained headhunter. We're not a recruitment agency.
Okay.
So clients need to feel comfortable that we'll represent them very well in the market because they ask us to represent them exclusively.
Okay.
And without getting into the detail too much, they pay us in the beginning, middle, and end, not just at the end.
Okay.
So it fosters a longer term relationship, right?
Okay.
So
that's an interesting model.
Yeah, it's how my kind and a few others refer to as headhunting. Some people use the term more loosely.
Okay.
But anyway, so I initially worked with clients which were mainly private sector clients that dealt with the public sector. I thought that was a nice synergy with my colleagues in outsourcing, in tech. It was great. Followed up some leads. Slightly to my surprise, my old firm, EY, became a client. A few people asked us to do work. I thought I was having lunch with friends, and one or two led to things. Can you send a proposal in? Can you do this? And my colleague said, "We've got to manage this like an account." I said, "Do we really?" Yeah, it's my friends. And no, this is serious. And we did that. And then a seismic thing happened for me on my professional life, which I couldn't have planned. One of the guys I'd hired, and I'd hired for, moved to South Africa at a time when EY was going through a big change program to integrate its businesses across their version of EMEA, which they concluded India, Europe, Middle East, India, Africa. As part of that, the Africa business, which at the time was largely led from South Africa, was going through its own change program to upscale different businesses, and our little outfit got chosen to be the headhunter to work with them on that change program, the hiring part of the change program, and that was for a few years actually. The paying client was South Africa, but in some ways, if you like, the real client was whichever country we were hiring in, who the partner was or the managing partner was for that area. And that was amazing, actually. I started doing it, started traveling there to different countries. Inevitably, because of the size of Nigeria became a dominant part of our repertoire of client work for EY. And I say this to my Nigerian friends to this day. The trouble with you lot is you don't listen to people. Nobody listened to my elevator pitch. So whereas before I would have said, IT, professional services, consulting, that's my specialisms. If if they like you, they refer you on to other people. I mean, I say it jokingly because I wouldn't change it for the world. So before we knew it, we started getting referred to other organisations in
Nigeria.
Nigeria in particular.
Okay.
In different sectors.
Is that where you met Yao?
No, I knew Yao. I always wanted to meet him.
Okay.
But clearly I was not big enough to be on his radar. Right? I think I've said it.
So Yao is somebody who's appeared on this podcast.
No, I know.
Yeah,
I know.
One of our. I'm just saying this for the benefit of our viewers.
Well, Yao is a fantastic guy, and I'm privileged to have got to know him the last few years since he's been based in the UK and now going off to do amazing things. And he's. If we talk about Yao, we'll talk about nothing else. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
And so, started doing work for lots of different sectors, different clients, mainly indigenous clients, actually. And to the end of my days, I hope I never have a day when my stereotypes, my preconceived notions are not challenged, because you stop learning then, right? So, and they certainly started getting challenged then. I mean, some of the folks who will watch this will know this, but it was an insight to me in West Africa, and particularly Nigeria, to have so many senior women in lots of professions, in lots of jobs, and in business owners. I'm not saying the world is perfect for women in West Africa, but anecdotally, can I prove it? Probably not. It feels like more than we have here, right? And
was that because people, the women in those demographics were smarter, bolder, more skilled? All the opportunities were just offered to them. Was that intentional?
I'm being totally wise after the event. The first time I said to my colleague I was with in Nigeria, did we know this? Did one of our Nigerian friends tell us this? And did I go to the bathroom and miss it? Because this is amazing. Just in our normal going about, meeting people, going to companies, having drinks with people. And my wise after the event view is that a few of the things that constrain women's development in some countries is the law, affordable childcare, and a few other things, education, and so forth. You can take education off the table, right? I mean, and because the middle classes in Nigeria are hugely well educated, right? To the point of embarrassment sometimes compared to, I'm sure people will recognise their peers here. And the law, forget the law. There aren't really laws on discrimination. So that platform of protection isn't really there.
Okay.
But I think it's because two things. I think that there's a similar trends gone on within the middle classes in India as well. Okay. But for West Africa, probably Africa generally, but particularly West Africa, as I'm talking about, there's a combination of extended families who can help. And in many cases,
in the area of childcare, you mean?
Yeah, childcare support and that kind of thing. And also in many cases, a boarding school culture. Okay. Right. So lots of the classes themselves went to boarding schools, largely in the UK, but elsewhere as well, and often will want the same for their kids, and maybe and then college later on, and it could be wider Canada, other parts of Europe or America, and that those things free up. For some cases, women. I'm not saying it's perfect. I mustn't portray that at all, because I'm sure there's loads more to do. And some of the women's networks that probably exist because of that, right? So, but that was a nice eye opener for me. And so that's continued to this day. A collection of clients. They've continued to be very diverse into different sectors. During that time, when I was doing the work for EY across Africa, the word got to another part of EY in the Caribbean. And on and off, I've done quite a few projects for them in the Caribbean, and that's also led to one or two projects for corporate clients in the Caribbean. A different vibe, totally, actually, because Caribbean is obviously made up of a number of small islands, which add up to about, I think, it's 40 to 50 million people. And then clients in other sectors. I do work in different sectors. Some of it here. Something's happened the last few years, which I have to say I couldn't have planned, and I would like to do more of, is some people have made a connection that I'm a headhunter and I'm Christian. So I've been referred to a few Christian organisations to do some headhunting in the UK. They're very different, the ones I've worked with, and that's a pleasure as well, actually. A pleasure to do that. They're very different types of roles, different cultures of those organisations. And that keeps me going. And if might be true for a lot of people who work in business-to-business environments, because mine's the people business and I'm a business-to-business environment. I learned a long time ago from a boss I had when I was at PwC. He said, and I'm almost quoting him, you have to be comfortable with reflected glory. Right? You are going to dine out on stories of things that you haven't done, but you know people who have. You might have done a few things good, but you're going to done it, and I love it. I just love the fact I get to meet folk who do amazing things, even if they're not right for whatever the role is. Yeah. Because ultimately there could be all kinds of other factors. Yeah. But they still do a whole bunch of things I can't do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something I share as well. I mean, when we started this podcast, I've met some pretty amazing people.
I've seen. Yes, of course.
It's just really, I mean, the energy just kind of rubs off on you. It's
definitely.
It's amazing what people have done. So Mohan, I want to ask some difficult questions, because I've listened to you and I've picked up some things that you mentioned. One of them being that you seem to have had a succession of bosses or managers who were very supportive of your career progression. And my question is, and I know we spoke about this a little bit before we came on air, my question is, are some people just lucky because others don't have that environment? Others work in environments where there isn't that support, from a senior level, for people to have the latitude to learn and to develop. And anyone who works at a senior level, you can't just talk about diversity and inclusion and pick someone off the street and expect them to function in a boardroom, at a board level, on the C-suite level. They just don't have the skill sets. They don't have the exposure. People need to be gradually introduced and given that latitude. And my question is, what part of it is luck? And what part of it is intentionally developing a skill set or putting yourself on people's radar? So that, I don't know if my question is clear.
That makes a lot of sense. I don't think we can dismiss the thing and say there's no such thing as luck plays no role. But the trouble with that is, it doesn't. What do you do with it, right? Luck. I was unlucky. That person was lucky. I think there's something else more important than that. I mean, basically, how people do in many parts of life, not just working life. It could be in voluntary life. It could be in charities. It could be in people's faith groups or whatever. Is there are three things, right? One is technical competence. Are you good at the thing you are? Whether you're an engineer or an accountant or a salesperson, are you good at doing that thing, right? That's, I reckon that's a third of what will determine your success, right? Okay. The next third is visible. Have you made yourself visible to the people around you? Because if you're not visible, how can anyone think of yourself? When someone, if your mates are going out for dinner and someone says, which restaurant do you go to? Well, you're only going to recommend the ones you have made themselves known to you. Probably because you've been there, or because you saw a feed came up on your social media or something like that, or someone else said there was a good review. So visibility is important, right? I mean, you can't blame people for not nominating you if they never know about you, right? And the third thing is profile. So when you make yourself visible, do you make an impression? Do you find something which distinguishes you? Not entirely, but enough, right? So, and I think it's the three things. And I actually think it's probably a third. It's a bit depressing to think technical competence is less than half of what it makes to be successful, because a load of people, especially from minority communities who have come to a new land, is they said, study, get your head down and study. But actually, yes, of course, but actually, you've got to network. You've got to do. I mean, I've learned from different family members and elsewhere, right? I mean, I have an uncle who I never knew him at work, but I bet you he was pretty good at his job. He was in engineering and in management in a company, but he had a distinctiveness about it. He said, "Look, because there aren't many minority people. I have to recognise that people always remember me, right? Because so I'm going to make it work for me." So he used to dress a little bit more flamboyantly, had a fashion taste, because he felt he got license to it, and it added to him being good. Now, this is only good because he was good at what he did. There's no point dressing flamboyantly in the project. I think there's something about that, and I think some people forget the other 2/3. Now, how people do that will vary, and it may vary according to people's character. Not everyone wants to spend every evening networking with work colleagues or in the industry they're in. Not everyone can because of other commitments. But there's ways in which people can make themselves visible and profiled.
So there's a guy I'm going to be interviewing in a few weeks, a guy called True Powell. He's in Birmingham, and he's like a branding expert. And he talks about branding, and people need to create a brand and come up with a personal brand. And I guess that kind of ties in with the profile and visibility side of things, because you could be technically competent, but then if no one knows that you have these skill sets, and one of the things as well, I guess we spoke about before we came on air, was you can have somebody who's hired to do a job, but that person has so much more within them that they could offer, within that company, but then nobody knows about it.
Okay, well, that is the other side of because all of that you asked me is all about what I would call the supply side. Right, what the individuals have with them. There is the demand side, and we have less control over the demand side because we're the suppliers of our talents, right? And the demand side is where organizations, because of history, because of tradition, and because of any of the isms, actually, any of the discriminations, have inbuilt cultures, right? And we have terms of this which evoke lots of emotions in people. When you start talking about institutionally racist, very evocative terms, because nobody ever wants to be labelled those. But those terms exist because these trends are here, and it's not just it's everywhere in the world, right? Every where in the world, people are hugely organisations build up around a certain culture that tends to favour those who've been in it, right? So the big challenge is how on the demand side, do organisations adapt so they recognise the talents and skills, and that partly, and you can make a moral case for this. How should people not? And that's powerful, and that works. In fact, my experience is the more senior people are, the more they respond to the moral case. Because there's a point where you want to leave a legacy. There's a point where you want to self-actualize in life. There's a point where you've got kids of your own, and you'd hate the thought that they never achieve their objectives because of something beyond their control, right? So, so that's, and then there's obviously, do this wrong, you're going to get in court, and that's a nice driver as well. But that's not really, it doesn't warm the heart, right? And then there's the a kind of a social and a business case. It's good for business, especially if you're in a consumer business. Obviously, you want to reflect your customer base, or if you want to make decisions that are in tune with the times. You have to have folk who represent different generations and different genders and races, and have a way of harnessing it properly, right? So, and it's organisations are beginning to do that. I retain a sense of optimism that the needle is moving, right? And sometimes it gets knocked back. You hear a horrible story about either it's a physical attack or a set of data that comes out that said the needle didn't move in the last quarter or the last year. It's depressing, but I have to retain some sense in which this can get better on the major fault lines that we have laws on these things in this country, right? So, I don't know, does that help? I mean,
yeah, I think it does. I mean, another thing you've just spoken about is that technical competence, because, and that's where I think people need to learn how to be true to themselves. Okay, if you're not somebody, I mean, because everybody has kind of a template. There's some people are more detail oriented than others. Other people are better at dealing with people, so people management skills are there, and they're well comfortable talking to people. Others tend to be quite happy to not be in the limelight, but happy to stay in the background and have their impact, kind of behind the scenes. And part of technical competence, I think, requires people to be true to themselves, because if you're somebody who's not a people person, you're not comfortable approaching strangers in the street or selling, or some of the things that you need to do, like going to bid for new business, and these are real things that people need to do in certain roles.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about that is it tends to. You're right, and people must be true. But we mustn't always make the mistake of saying the way that job has been done or has always been the way. Selling doesn't necessarily mean doing the big ticket presentation, standing at the trade fair, or hitting the phones. It could be a quiet, thoughtful, policy-orientated approach. And we mustn't assume these things are all different. I mean, I'm sure even in your field, in your day job, your accounting, things change. There are different ways in which, obviously, there are some requirements in terms of statutory requirements, but there must be different ways in which a function can be run and organised, and that can be done around different ways. So we sometimes get that wrong. The other point, though, that relates to this and what you were saying before is if an organisation doesn't find a way of pulling in all the talents of the people, some people, I think subconsciously or consciously, decide I'm going to be that really reliable backroom person who never gets the limelight, but gets rewarded decently, and maybe even get applauded in the internal team meeting. Thank you for drafting the document that over there that person presented, or whatever, right? And what you often find is they find other expressions for their skills. It could be in their community or in their
like a side hustle, or
it could be in a bit. It could be in charitable. It could be they run the football league, right? Or they
do something
run
in
the church choir, right? Or they and they even could have leadership roles. And sometimes I think it's amazing when you it's an exercise. I don't know how often it happens. If leaders got a sample size of people and actually asked about what else they did, you'd find that some people are actually bringing all these leadership skills or qualities to work, literally hanging them up in the same place they hung their coat, right? And then walking in. So, and that's partly because organisations don't know how to recognise what qualities and skills that might exist from folks which they won't automatically understand. Now, there's another dimension to this, which is because if we're talking about this theme of diversity and inclusion, we can talk about it from a UK context. You know, the people who live and raised here, but there's another tension which I have loved learning about, which is the global dimension, right? And there's some bits where the two clash. If I'm allowed to be a little bit provocative, right? So if an organisation wants to do part of its diversity journey, might say we are going to introduce a mentoring scheme, and maybe for women or maybe for black minority people who are underrepresented. Nothing wrong with that in itself, but that's dealing with the supply. As if that's the issue. Usually, there might be. I'm not saying the mentoring scheme won't be any good or the development program won't be good and people might learn. But if you fill it up, this is provocative. If you fill it up with a bunch of middle class folk from India or Nigeria, you are doing them a disservice because they don't need to be on the program. And you're doing a double service. So the people who should be on it are not there because these guys took the place. But it's very easy for the organisation to pick those folk because those folks have come from great educations. They have probably a bit more of an international and global outlook to life. And they're a bit closer to people like us.
But isn't that the case though, that those are the people who come across as being most appropriately suited to be groomed into certain leadership positions because they've been to proper schools, they've been to Russell
Group University,
Group universities and stuff like that. Because some of the people that I see a trend in my interaction with people, especially for this podcast, that the people who seem to have gone to or have had a certain educational background are the very people who seem to be able to navigate their way to the top. The only exception really was a gentleman I interviewed last week who came from a village in Africa and had never had any exposure to professional services and met this Latvian lady in university, or somebody gave him a chance to sponsor him for school in the UK. He met this Latvian lady on his course and she then exposed him to professional service. Oh, you can work in an office, because all the people that he was associating with, living with, were people who were doing sort of menial jobs as immigrants. And he was the first person in his family to go to university and have all that exposure. So he kind of, his eyes and his as well. He had that exposure and managed somehow to navigate his course. And today he's a partner at Deloitte.
Okay.
But he didn't have that private school privileged.
No, to hear those stories is great. And if there have been interventions that made that happen, and if we can commoditize those into interventions like development program, all good. That's all good, because what you're saying is the talent is there, and if we just give people other experiences, but we shouldn't ignore the fact the organisations also have to change, right? So, and that might relate to generational changes around attitudes to work. That's another thing, right? But it might well, markets changing, right? How you organise yourself to be nimble in different markets is changing. I heard, we've all had experience of dealing with large institutions who are slow to digitize, right? And if we're I'm not the most techie guy at all, but I want there to be digital things, ways of doing things. When you suddenly find in a process, suddenly there's paper to be delivered, and someone's got to show up somewhere, and it is frustrating. Our challenge of our time is how do you do that and still keep people on board, the folks who are less digitally enabled, right? Because it's their world too, right? So,
so you talk about the demand side, which we can't really control, okay? And you talk about the fact that companies need to change.
No, individuals can't. Collectively you can. All external pressures can happen. It could be peer pressure. It could be reputational pressure. It could be legislative pressure.
Okay.
But the trick is, organisations don't actually do this consciously. They use the phrase low-hanging fruit, which is, the advantage for a company doing a great development program for minority staff or women or something like that, and it may be useful. I'm not going to dismiss. I'm just trying to is that it's a great photo opportunity as well, right? It's a great. It looks great on the website, goes in the intranet, and I'm not being too cynical about that. But the demand side stuff has no photo opportunities in it whatsoever. It's people poring over data on on computers in offices about looking at promotion prospects, appraisal records, proportions of people from different communities applying, or even customer data. All this stuff is really boring. There's no, it's not boring in itself, but from a visual point of view, there's nothing in it. Right? There's nothing you can do. So any of us who look at LinkedIn feeds of people different, but there's a disproportionate number of. We launched this initiative today. We had a great team away day. We did, because that's the thing you can take a photo of. Okay. So we all met and then spent the whole day by our laptop delivering on this project. Never makes the story because there's nothing to show. Right.
That's quite interesting. Mohan, what would you say to somebody who stays in an employment for many years, like a career, sort of a career kind of person? Somebody stays in the same employment like 15 years, 20 years, and they join as a graduate trainee and work the way up to the top C-suite and all that. Compare that to somebody who sort of changes jobs every 2-3 years. Would you say that either of these two paths is a better path to pursue? The reason I'm asking that question is people who stay in a place for many years and try and grow and develop in that space tend to lose their sharpness when it comes to looking for jobs. Their CVs are dated. They're not very comfortable with the interview process, and even interview processes have moved on, over the years. And somebody who hasn't been for an interview for 14, 15 years, might not be comfortable, dusting up their CV and going out there. And like I said, you got the other side of people who keep changing jobs every 2-3 years. Would you say that either of these paths is better, or is it just an individual situation?
Yeah, people find themselves in different situations, and some people find them in organisations that are of a scale that they can get opportunities. The thing I always say to people when I'm talking to people about this is, if you've been with an organisation a long time and you're worried about how that looks, for whatever reason, you're now looking at maybe you've been made redundant, or there's a restructuring going on, or you don't like the new boss you've got, or they're asking you to relocate and you don't want to relocate, or that's the driver after maybe 10, 15, 20 years. can you share, honestly, that actually the 10, 15, 20 years you spent there was like a series of different jobs? Was the organisation nurturing enough that you actually did cover this subject area, and then you moved to another one, and it may be true. I mean, don't try not to lie. It may be true that actually you didn't move on because the organisation kept giving you great opportunities, new territories to look after, new disciplines, you ran a change program, you introduced a new technology system, you helped nurture a new product to market, or you did. You dealt with some difficult international issues for the organisation. If you kept doing that, because the organisation wanted to have people who knew the territory, right? And they knew if you're good there, we can put you over there. That's why people do stay with long organisations. And that's true with quite a lot of people in the FMCG space, and people in the traditional areas of oil and gas and energy, and actually in lots of banking as well. So it's what they want to make of that, right? And the telltale sign for me is if I'm interviewing someone who's been a long-serving or even a lifer, I don't mean that disparagingly, is the real telltale sign is they start using company jargon and expect that we will talk like that. So, and I could name the people, most of the companies that do that most, but I won't. It's probably not fair. They honestly think the world talks like that. And I sometimes say, do you talk to your other half and your kids like that? Because they learned the jargon of the company. I don't know how that works. So, whereas those who don't, I mean, I'm always struck by people who are long-serving and lifers, but have and this is in all sectors, have the energy and the curiosity and the change orientation that challenge that stereotype that they've been there for a long time. I can think of individuals now, because you asked me that, who fit that. And it's not a crime either way. Because the other way is also something. I mean, it's like, do people stick around long enough to see the results, right? Because if they are dropping every two or 3 years, I mean, were they able to achieve something decent then? Obviously, some disciplines have that as a culture in some sales roles, that there is more of a movement of people around at a quicker pace. And all of this is in a world where, and we mustn't overdo this, the corporate as being the career path is diminishing. I mustn't overdo that, because sometimes we do overdo it and think that there's now no graduate schemes and there's no large companies hiring for international positions, and that's still the case, obviously, in lots of fields. But to the extent that it's less that now, that changes the model, right? And it partly responds to how people are, how work is organised and how technology is interfacing, so you can have lots of players, but not necessarily all under one business roof.
So would you say that there are any soft skills that somebody watching this podcast could develop that from a recruiter's perspective that could stand them in good stead when it comes to looking for new roles and new opportunities?
Yes, so things like, if we're talking about the interview type situation, obviously people have got to make a good impact. And it doesn't mean they have to punch the air as they walk in and stride across the place, because unless that's your style and that's what you want to do. But you need to have some ways in which you're able to show each of those three things, technical competence, visibility, and profile, right? So in the way in which you converse and talk, right? So and whether you make it easier for the person. I always think the best interviews, and this is true for any of us in business organizations, even in my work when I'm pitching for work, is where the meeting feels like it's a meeting of people in a normal day rather than in an interview situation, because it's almost a simulation of what you'd love the interviewer to think subliminally, if not overtly. This person is all right, I can imagine having meetings with them and having workshops and discussing problems, because that's what we've just been doing, albeit in an interview situation. That's the win. I mean, you can't always control that, but that's one. Secondly, there's some mechanical things, right? We're in an era where it's all about keyword search. right? This is the world we live in, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we all do keyword search for everything all the time, right?
Okay.
So in people's social media profile,
Mm-hmm.
which is an important part of the profile bit,
Mm-hmm.
and visibility as well, actually.
Yeah.
You better put in the words that reflect the things you do and the things you want to do. Because again, how can anyone find you if you never said that you led the new product development?
Okay.
Because someone's going to search on new product development in your sector, and your name might come up.
Oh, okay.
If you want to be really anorak on this,
Mm-hmm.
the social media tools allow you to see how many people have viewed, or how often you've turned up in searches over the last week or 2 weeks, or whatever, right? It'd be interesting. Sometimes you don't know what to do with that information because you don't know if there's a bigger number or a small number, right? But it's often quite humbling to think, my goodness, I turned up in various searches.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question I was going to ask you was about Gen Zs, because Gen Zs tend to be less prone to sort of go the whole way. They sort of want to come in and want to be given opportunities very early on. They want to be left on their own to do things as they see fit. They want a bit of latitude, a bit of responsibility, and all that. And how do you see that changing the scope of the job market? Because with all these Gen Zs coming in, they're kind of always on their phone, on their social media, but then they still work. But then they work a different. It's a different pace, a different attitude, a different mindset. They come in maybe a little bit later. They take their lunch breaks. They leave bang on time. Stuff like that. Whereas the old school people tend to be more traditional in terms of, especially the more senior they get, in terms of they don't really take a lunch break, or they might work through their lunch. You hardly see them leaving at 5:30, whereas the Gen Zs are bang on out of the door. Do you see that changing the scope of the office environment, say in the future?
Yeah, but then the office environment's changing, right? There's all the cliches about post-lockdown, how we've all learned we can all do things remotely or hybrid, right? We don't have to rehearse that. So the environment's changing anyway. So don't put it all on the Gen Zs, and also don't assume that all Gen Zs are the same, and that there aren't some who actually may exhibit some of the qualities or behaviours that you've associated with previous generations. And also don't assume that won't change anyway, because there's a point where financial commitments kick in, they find their future partner, things start to change, start to think about where we live, but they're doing that in a context of flexible working, and they will do things in different ways, and it is up to us to harness that. And actually often that suits the business objectives as well, because it allows businesses to respond to opportunities a bit more, right? So I'm trying to be positive about it, and because the danger without that, it's like stop the world, I want to get off, right? Because it's not like it used to be, and we can all go down the route. I could do that for ages, actually. It ain't what it used to be, about how we're taking all parts of the community with us. I've got some aging in-laws, and I do get where they're coming from when a lot of the things they want to do is really difficult to do, right? I also get that for some commercial organizations, their role is actually like a social... I've got older family members, who've gone to the bank and got the bank staff to do things that have nothing to do with banking, right? Right? And also come from a world where you ask for somebody at the bank. Right, because they know you, they know the family, and you actually know something about their family. And I'm amazed that some of those organisations seem to be doing that, as well as doing whatever they do, because obviously branches are closing and everything else. But all that you mentioned is a challenge, but some of them they're good things. I mean, they're great things. I mean, this multitasking that young folk do. I've got 2 daughters, and I see this exactly right. Everything you've described, I've described, and I get it. And I'm in awe of that actually. Sometimes, I think if we can get my wife and I get half of that, it's probably not a bad thing. That and I do think we can overdo they leave at 5:30. It doesn't mean they don't clock on a bit later and do something else later on. Or they do it at all flexible times. And it depends what else they're doing, and what if they got what they needed to do then in the time available.
Okay. Mohan, how did you get into your music? Because I know you're a musician as well. That's one of the many things that you do. You actually have your own YouTube channel and everything. How did you get into that?
I learnt the piano. I did classical piano. In Britain. My mum and dad made me go for lessons on the basis that they never had the chance. And it wasn't my natural preference in music, but I went through it. And it's like, not that I'm a swimmer. If I was swimming across the channel, when you swim 3/4 of a you don't say, I'm fed up with this and you swim back. You keep going to the other end, right? So I was coming to the end. There's 8 grades and I was like 6 or 7. I thought, I better keep swimming, right? So, and actually what it did give, and actually I have a great appreciation of classical music now than I ever did before, actually, but what it did give me is some technical skills which stay with you, but my real passion now, and it's evolved over time, is soul, jazz, R&B, gospel, Latin. And if I'm going to sound a bit pretentious, because I've thought, why those musics, not other ones? I think these are my pretentiousness, music born of struggle. So people who, usually those forms of music have come from folk who just put it out there. Right. Life was tough or joyous or whatever it was, but generally they just put it out there, right?
Very authentic.
And obviously it gets more sophisticated over time, and you get millionaires out of it and all that stuff. But the roots of the music is, and it made me understand why sometimes music which I've fallen for, well, lyrical music, which is not in English, not in a language I understand, it still moves me. And I'm thinking, why is that happening? Because something I think I can sense the music of struggle there in somewhere in the heritage of where that music came from, which you get blends now. And so I did all of that stuff. Used to play piano for a jazz singer when I was at university. She sang, and we got paid a bit for that. And then had a band which was an offshoot from my church, which did soul, and threw a few gospel tunes in. There's a different iteration of that we've been doing over the last few years. A hugely eclectic group, really. I mean, we shouldn't be allowed. I mean, because we've come at it all from different positions, and I'm the musical director when we do gigs, but I lose as many battles as I win. Right. I think I actually learn more about managing people in that environment than I do for anything to do with work, because people can buzz off, right? One small insight to that: when we're rehearsing, because we're busy, and we haven't got much time, so time matters, right? It's been a struggle, and we often can't ever get everyone there, so we're always missing someone. The bass player's not there, or it's terrible if the drummer's not there, but whatever. And we talk very bluntly with each other. And some people have watched that and seen that and said, "My goodness, you don't get offended." And I've thought about it. I said, I think we're not challenging each other's musical prowess. We're simply saying that if you play like that, we all sound like rubbish, right? Especially the chorded instruments, me and the guitarist, right? If us do get it wrong, the whole thing sounds bad. And what I love in the group of musicians I've been working with through our church is it's 3 generations, and there's absolutely no respect for age and seniority. We all give it, and we all give it on something that's beyond us, our instrument. So the young lad who's our drummer, we're going to lose now, he's about to go to university. He gets up from the drum kit and waves his drumsticks at me or something. No, you got to do this differently. It's brilliant to see that. I mean, it's a little it's brilliant to see that. So that's the music, and then I've always written music and played it. Lockdown did a lot of things for a lot of people, right? So I don't want to. Lockdown was a terrible thing. The virus was a terrible thing, but the small jewel is that many of us found time or found energy and found or re-energized things we did before, and I started recording some of the music.
Okay.
And then putting the videos to do with it. I pulled in friends to help who were fantastic. Really, my wife to help, some friends from my church, and it's mainly jazz, but influenced by all kinds of things. So we were in Jamaica a couple of years ago, so not surprising I came back with a tune that was reggae inspired, and then came back from Israel last year, came back with a tune that's very Middle Eastern inspired. Something else for the islands of Sentosa in Singapore. I came back with those. So it's wherever it all takes. It takes them about. I love it. I'm and now there's no lockdown. The trick is for all of us who have busy working lives and family lives, is how do we squeeze the time to do other things, right? But you got to try. So.
Anyway, and today also marks a turning point in your career. Do you want to just talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So I've been with my colleagues at Rockpools for. I think it's 16 years, 17 years. 17 years, I don't know if you know the phrase, painters don't paint their own house. I'm a painter who doesn't paint his own house. I ask other people all the time, so what is your career plans? What are you doing to do? I really must ask myself that sometimes. So the direction of my portfolio of work has gone in a direction I did not plan. I could pretend I did. I could put a post-event rationalization story, but I didn't. But I love it. I love the diversity of work, the challenge. My colleagues do great work, but it's different. It's more in where our initial heartland was, around government infrastructure work, and predominantly UK. So I've got to a point to say I'm going to venture out on my own. And which actually I'm doing from next week. The business is called Talent Circles, and it's to do much of what I'm doing now, international executive recruitment, retained by my clients, hopefully in as diverse a range of sectors as I've been doing, maybe spiced up with some work with faith-based organisations, which I'd like to carry on doing, and where it's asked about some contribution around the diversity agenda. We've ended up doing some of this in the last couple of years. I don't push that hard because there's lots of other people who do that, but it's a strand I bring in. Some of this challenge around deal with the demand side, not just the supply side, is I think worth making.
Fantastic. Well, as we come to the end of this episode, what do you think about this podcast and what we're trying to do?
It's really great. I think what's interesting is you haven't narrowed it down to a certain strand of discipline or profession or even seniority. I mean, your AAO thing captures it, doesn't it? Really, because because people have come at it from all different backgrounds, and you wouldn't necessarily expected it. I think it's really fantastic. It's a really great way of shining a light, but it's soft lighting, shining a soft lighting on success, because I think we can moan about what a tough life things are, and things are for a lot of people with its social circumstances now or anything, but when you get great success stories and they're all interesting and sometimes exceptional, but they're not so exceptional that you can't see something of that in you, right? Because the danger if they are all superhuman, well, just that that's marvelous. That's marvelous for them. But people are, everyday people. You extract enough to get people to show some of their vulnerabilities too, right? So,
We also have a tradition on this podcast where we give our guests an opportunity to dedicate this episode to anyone or any group of people of their choice. So I'd like to ask you who you'd like to dedicate this episode to, and if you can either look in the camera, it's entirely up to you.
Gosh. I'll dedicate it to my dad. We lost my dad nearly 4 years ago now.
Okay.
Really great guy. I referred to him before as a gentle rebel, and I think it's really great that he was a gentle rebel. He was a party animal, and I think that trait has genetically got passed down to me. So I think I can hold my own in social situations. So I think I got that from him. He didn't choose approaches which were the obvious ones, based on his peers, and they were always gentle. I mean, would you mind me saying this? A good example is him, my dad, and my mum's marriage is a role model marriage for us, really. If we can emulate something like that in our lives, I think we've done all right. But he was also one for these great one-liners and all these things. He'd say, "Yeah, I believe in arranged marriages. I'll do the arranging." Right? Because he broke the rules. He wasn't supposed to. There's etiquette to these things in lots of our emerging developing country cultures. He pushed the rules out, and he started dating my mum, buying a Vespa scooter. She'd ride on the back of it. I mean, we don't do these things in the north of Sri Lanka, in Jaffna. But he did this stuff, and he modelled himself on a mixture of Sinatra and Presley, Elvis, because those music was going into the country. He moved us down to South London when none of our lot were doing that. The job that he got and stayed with to the end of his years, after a long time, he got partly by walking out of the interview, because he was convinced that one of the panel was taking a disliking to him, and he wondered if it was race. So he just stopped the interview and said, "I think we should end it here. I don't think this is going anywhere." And he left the room. And there's two versions of events afterwards, but the main version is that one of the professors ran after him and said, "Sorry about that. Do you know the way out?" And he said, "Well, I've worked my way in." Then they offered him a job, and he stayed with it for a long time, 20, 30 years. And I just love that gentle rebel style.
Fantastic. Well, if you like this episode, I'd first of all like you to leave some comments in the comment section below. Like this video as well, share and subscribe. And Mohan, once again, thank you so much for your time and your wealth of wisdom. I don't feel that there's a lot more that you had to give, but we're constrained by time. So we might get you back at some point in the future to look at some other aspects. And I have some other questions that I haven't had a chance to ask, so we might do a part 2. So if you want us to do a part 2 with Mohan, please leave in the comment section below, and that will validate our invitation for him to come back. On that note, I'll say thank you very much, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.